Stan was still somewhat youngish, but had lived enough years for his sharpened point to be rounded off by routine. Every morning he woke up on the left side of the bed at precisely 6:30. He made coffee with 2 scoops and 8 cups of water. He drank 2 cups from a gray mug and dumped the rest of the pot down the drain. He brushed his brown hair and put contacts into his brown eyes. He wore nondescript trousers and a matching belt and shoes. Every button-down he owned was white, and all of his polo shirts were varying shades of blue. He was of average height and average weight. His skin was clear enough to be forgettable. He had no tattoos and he had no scars. He was not special or different in any meaningful way. He was an unremarkable man who went to his unremarkable job in an unremarkable building on a cookie-cutter street. He sat at a desk in a cubicle set in the middle of a perfectly straight row with acute corners. Every day he walked home by the same route. He slid his key into the lock where it perfectly fit. He turned the tumbler smoothly and listened to it click. Then he opened the door and let it swallow him up before putting it back in the perfectly fitting jam. One day, Stan noticed something he had never noticed before. As he walked to his job, he caught his body mindlessly twisting this way and that to avoid being run into by other walkers on their way to other jobs in other buildings on other copy and pasted streets. And he began to wonder if instead of completely ordinary, maybe he was not quite right. The next day, Stan stayed in bed until 6:35. He left the house 5 minutes later than usual. He carefully walked the same route to his job, watching for a glimmer of eye contact from the strangers bustling along. He walked down the street and into his building. He went up the stairs and down the rows and around the corners and into his cubicle. Everything seemed exactly the same. Well, almost. Had the door of his cubicle always been slightly off-center? Had the wall on the left always been just a little longer than the wall on the right? He was unsettled for the rest of the day. He could feel the door at his back, inching to the right, making the wall on the left longer and longer until he could not resist turning around quickly, hoping to catch its sneaking movements. The day ended 5 minutes later than usual. Stan practically ran home, twisting left and twisting right, avoiding people who were looking right through him. He fled into his building and down the hall to his door. He slid the key into the lock and turned it to the right. It ratcheted loudly as it went, as though something were stuck in its innards or pushing back against his efforts. He pushed the door inward and it shuddered against the jamb. He sank gratefully into the maw of darkness, his heart hammering against his ribs like a frightened bird. He had to slam his shoulder into the door to get it to snick home. The next morning, Stan woke troubled. He had been dreaming of doors that had been moving slightly to the right, and each time he tried to go through one, it was no longer directly in front of him, and he had to move to the right before he could go forward again. But each time he aligned himself with the doorway, it slid over once more. He was troubled, but grateful that even as he grew more and more alert, the dream slipped further away. By the time he put the coffee on, the last effluvium of the dream had blown away. He felt almost normal as his hand gripped the doorknob. He twisted it to the right and gave a gentle pull, but the door would not budge. He pulled harder, his shoulder aching from slamming the door shut the night before. Finally, the door gave a screech of wood on wood and popped open. Stan rushed through as though it might change its mind and slam shut again, trapping him inside. He pulled the door hard, but it would not shut. The door was at least an inch too long to fit into the jamb, and he could swear it was growing even as he watched. He let go of the handle and backed away. At first he was unsure, but fear soon overruled indecision, and, abandoning the still open door, he ran full tilt out of the building and onto the sidewalk. For a moment he stood there, wild eyes flitting left and right, trying to catch the buildings moving. Incrementally, he slowed his breathing. The buildings seemed still for now. The people, though, were different. They continued to walk by, not seeming to avoid him, but never actually striking him either. Was he really there? Suddenly, Stan needed to root himself to this spot, to find out if there was something fundamentally wrong with his existence in this time and place. He lay down right there on the sidewalk, staring up. In an unremarkable city, unremarkable people continued on their way to unremarkable jobs in unremarkable buildings on copy-pasted streets. Every now and again, one would step over an empty spot on the sidewalk, as though avoiding something not quite forgotten lying there.